Yeah, so the, the session today obviously is about account management, account planning, and Mark technically is one of is amazing. Right, his knowledge and experience in this topic. Personally, I'm like I feel like a little tiny speck of knowledge in comparison with him, and so he's going to run through this session with you today. It's the second in a series that we've sort of been working on, that Mark's been working on. And it really digs deeply. It's really technical. It's about 40 minutes long. So it is really technical. We're recording it so you can go back and you can have a look at it. As you're going through it, feel free to ask questions, pop them in the chat, and then Mark will take them at appropriate time. And then we'll have about 10, 15 minutes at the end where we'll have some questions about it. It is a technical session, but personally, I'm sort of really excited to see the session and sort of get to know more about Mark's view on account planning. So over to you, Mark. And yep.
Wonderful. Fraser, I'm humbled by the intro. Okay. Welcome, everyone. It's lovely to see some familiar faces as well and see some familiar names. So so we're here to talk about making strategic account planning your competitive advantage. And the key thing here is how do we protect and grow these key customer relationships? As Fraser mentioned, this is part 2. So in part 1, we discussed the rationale, why we should do it, all the way up to account selection. Today, we're going to dig a little deeper, not just talking about implementing, but talking about what does the account strategy look like. So as Fraser mentioned, we're going to get technical, but the only reason we're going to get technical is because this is not just about the what, it's about the how we do this. Technical does not mean complex. Nothing that we'll talk about today is rocket science at all, but it is a process, and we'll sort of pick up on that as we work through. So, bit of background. My name is Mark Wills. So I've been doing this now for well over 10 years. I've been in sales since I first started in my career. I've worked as a consultant for Miller Heiman, Korn Ferry. And now what I do is I help organizations accelerate revenue growth. And you can see some of the organizations here that we have worked with and continue to work with across a range of different industries. Importantly, though, one of the aspirations, one of the strategic things that we want to achieve is to be able to bring some of this big code thinking, some of the stuff that makes these organizations so successful, into the realm of the small to medium-sized enterprise space. And so that's exactly what we're here to do today, I guess. So let's just share with you what we're going to cover. So the focus is going to be very much on the strategic elements of this and the frameworks that we use, or framework that we use, in order to help you be successful in protecting and growing these key customers. So we're going to share with you what makes other organizations who are really good at account planning get the results they get. So there's a range of things we'll talk about, from what is the framework, how do we implement it, what does the team look like, all the way through to what's the purpose of this ultimately. And the purpose is always going to be, how do we turn strategy into action? So let's start with a quick poll. Let me just launch this poll. Part two of the 1, 2, 3 is implementing this strategic account planning process. Right, here's what I'm interested. I'm going to launch this poll now. Just give me 2 seconds. Just, Fraser, can you see that? Yep. Okay, Karina, thank you. I can see the nodding head. So we often hear, or it is often said, that successful sales is a combination of art and science. So give me your view, okay? What do you think it is? Is it all art, all science, mostly art, mostly science, or about even? We've got 14 people on the call, so I can watch as your answers coming in, but let's see what you think, and then I'll give you my view afterwards. So we've got 9 of 14 responded, so 10 of 14. Still waiting for a few. 12 of 14. Let's give it a couple more seconds. So what's interesting is I did this poll on LinkedIn as well last week. 60% of people said it's mostly art. So here we've got most people, 2/3 of people saying that it's about even. Let me just end the poll. So that's most people that have answered. Okay, share the results. There we go. Okay, so we got 62% said about even, 23% said mostly science, and a few said mostly art. And one person said all art. Well, okay, here's a little bit of translation of the language of art and science. So when we talk about art, specifically to give it some more pragmatic language, I believe we're talking about skills, and specifically what are the tactics that we use, which are normally when we're in front of the client, right? So that is of course incredibly important. But in this complex world in which we live in, where we have formalized buying processes and lots of decision makers, what has become increasingly more important is the science aspect of this. So science is what's the process that we use, the strategy, the frameworks, and the systematization. I think nowadays we are leaning more towards the science, but both of these are equally important at different times. And here's the reason why, because it's a strategic game. Why is it strategic? Because it's complex, right? Selling is complex. And the reason it's complex is because we have multiple people involved in the decision-making process. They've all got a bunch of different perceptions. The buying process becomes much more formalized. There's lots of competing alternatives, difficult to create differentiation. And there's this largely consensus-driven approach in terms of when it comes to making decisions. Now, quick question, just pop your answer in the chat here. Research-wise, just have a guess. What is the average number of decision makers in a typical B2B selling situation? I'd just like to get your take in terms of what you think it is. Just pop your answers in the chat. Joey says 7. Let's wait for a couple of others. So the question is, what is the average number of decision makers you think is involved in a typical B2B selling situation? 3 to 5 says Karina. 4 says Stephen. 2. Okay, so well, Wilfred says between 5 to 7, and Wilfred, I know you've been in my workshops before. So the actual average is 6.3. There's been a ton of research that's been done around this. So anybody that got around 6 to 7, okay, that's it. So and that's where it gets complex. Different people's perspectives, and so what we find is that businesses, okay, that have the greatest success organize themselves well, not just around how they pursue opportunities, but how they pursue, or how they implement and have a well-defined strategic account planning process. You will see that I focus on this word perceptions a lot during this webinar, because the game that we play is all about how do we advance the customer's perception of us, because the way they perceive us is the way they behave towards us. And there's all sorts of different things can happen as a consequence of the way they behave with us, whether that's if they behave with us in a very transactional way or whether we're treated as a trusted partner. It's a two very different worlds to live in. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So 3-part webinar series. Part 1, we talked about the business rationale for account selection. Today, we're talking about implementing an account planning process. The next section, part 3, is when we get a little bit more tactical, and we talk about how we actually execute successful account planning meetings. In the chat, what I would like to do just at this particular point is I just want to get to understand, is there anything specifically that anybody would like to get out of today that you're looking for as a consequence of this session, just so that we can capture that now and just make sure that we cover it as we go through? So just pop that in the chat. Let me just pause for a second. Gail, I remember we had a little chat beforehand. Was there anything that you specifically wanted? Because you said that you thought that the things that you wanted to find out were actually going to be covered in this session, but I'd love to know specifically what they are. Same for everybody else as well. Thank you, Karina. Okay. Well, keep popping those in the chat as we as we work our way through it, if anything comes to mind. But let's continue on. Okay, so see, what will be the hooks? So CM could you just elaborate on that a little bit for me? Just come off mute if you don't mind. CM on, can you hear me? Are you happy to elaborate? Or you can elaborate in the chat as well.
Yeah, sorry. I guess it's more of, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, very clearly.
Yeah. So so looking more for hooks that clients will be more sticky to so-called in terms of account management. So yeah, so I guess any specific hooks that we can get the client stickiness.
Okay. Well, yes, we will cover that actually. Yes, okay, that's good. Okay, so if there's nothing else, then we'll continue. But again, just pop it in the chat if there's anything comes to mind. So here's the basic premise, right? We cannot continue to think and act in the same way and get the results we need. Now, I normally ask this as a question, but I'm just going to make this as a statement. Times are changing. Even if we just look at the economics of the moment, they certainly appear to be getting tougher, even if we're just talking ourselves into this. None of us here were employed to achieve the same results as last year. And so the question is, how do we continue to grow? And the question, we believe, sits in this. Now, if you were in the last session, you would have heard me go through this. This is the sales system blueprint. This is where I want to anchor us in terms of just our understanding, because every single one of us that exists in an organization that is involved in selling has a sales system, whether it's formalized or not. Everybody is doing these kind of things, and it's interconnected. But let me just talk you through this. Wilfred, could I just get you to just pop you on mute? There we go, done. So the customer is at the center. And so below the horizontal line, we have opportunity management, where primarily what are we doing? We're qualifying the opportunities that we intend to pursue or not, so that we don't spend time pursuing opportunities that we have a low probability of winning. And then we are pursuing those opportunities, hopefully to a successful conclusion. Above the line, which is our topic for today, we have relationship management. This is where strategic account planning comes in. And as I mentioned before, what is our objective here? Primarily, it is to protect and grow our key strategic relationships. In reality, and this is borne out by research as well, there is no such thing as protecting. We have to grow. That's the only way to protect. And then to either side of that, we've got generating demand. So where does the new business come from? Does it come from our existing relationships, or does it come from new? And then to the left of it, we have client engagement. And that's what we talk about in the next session, in session 3. And there are really only 2 types of client engagements. That's one that's involved in the pursuit of an opportunity, and one that is involved in the management of a relationship. Now, the key point here is that there is tremendous amount to be gained by optimizing these 4 areas. And we work with organizations in these 4 areas and others all of the time. You don't have to optimize them all. It'd be good if you can. But just optimizing one can actually create stellar results. And we can talk to you about those results as well and give you some examples. So, but the key thing here is to understand the commercial value of strategic account planning. We need to understand that all of these things are interconnected in terms of what we do, particularly when we think about relationship management, because as we'll see in just a moment, one of the purposes of doing relationship management, strategic account planning, in a certain way, is to make sure that we have a better opportunity in terms of winning opportunities. So let's talk a little bit about strategy and tactics. In the chat, here's what I'd like you to do. Just tell me, or you can come off mute and tell me if you wish as well, what's the difference between strategy and tactics?
Yeah, I think strategy is something that you plan. Tactics are the ways to implement that strategy.
Shweta, I didn't hear the last bit. Could you just repeat it for me?
Yeah,
Sorry.
tactics are the ways to implement that strategy.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. There's still more. There's still more. You're right, but there's still more. Karina says strategy is defining the end goal, objectives, and tactics are the actions to reach those objectives. Yes, also, there's still more. Okay, oops. Raman says tactics is how we convert into actions. All true. So all of that's true. Just to add on to what you've just said, so I want you to think of strategy as like that aerial view. And you are looking down on the situation. Now, in this case, we're talking about account planning, but we could be talking about an opportunity, or we could broaden this and we could be talking about sporting scenarios, whatever it might be. Okay, but what we're looking to do is how do we understand what are our positions of advantage and what are our positions of disadvantage, or strengths and weaknesses, if you like. And so what we want to be continually doing as strategists is making sure that we are assessing these positions of advantage and disadvantage so that we can leverage the strengths in order for us to be able to eliminate or mitigate some of the positions of weakness. I'm going to talk to you exactly how we do this, right? So concepts at the start, but we'll talk about how we do it afterwards. And Raman in the chat just said strategy is the science and tactics is the art. Yes, absolutely. Totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. Your strategy, and this is key to understand this, right? When you're putting your account planning strategy together, the quality of the information that you have is super important. Rubbish in, rubbish out. And again, we'll be focusing on how to get that information and what type of information you need. And this will speak to CM's point about hooks a little bit later. But essentially, what we're looking to do is understanding exactly what is influencing the people in the account, the stakeholders, their sense of prioritization, decision-making, and their view of the world. That level of understanding is super critical for us. So I want to launch another poll here. Let me just launch this. 2 seconds. Oh, for some reason I can't. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Let me launch this poll. So the question here is, what I would like to know here is which of these objectives of strategic account planning, which of these are objectives of strategic account planning? So you've got protecting and growing key relationships, get in front of the right person at the right time with the right information, advance customer perceptions, or all of the above. So just answer that question and just let me know what you think. We've got 2 of 16, 3 of 16. 6 of 16. Okay. 11 of 16. So the answer, of course, is all of the above. So what I want to do is I want to give you a more tighter definition of what it is that we are looking to do. I'm just letting the poll, I'm going to talk whilst the poll's still running, and then we'll close it in just a second. Most people at the moment, about half, are saying all of the above. Here's the definition of what strategic account planning is meant to do. So we've talked about this already, right? It's to protect and grow your strategic customers or your strategic customer relationships. But the way we do this, what we want to be doing is you need to get in front of the right people at the right time with the right information so that we can advance perceptions of key stakeholders and ultimately do these three things: create meaningful, recognized differentiation, identify opportunities earlier, and get out in front of the buying process, because these are the challenges that we face in the selling situation most frequently. And that's what we want to do at the strategic level, because there are just some problems when we are selling to customers nowadays because of the formalization of their buying process, and they reach out later in their buying process. There are just some issues that we can't solve at that level. So we need to go one level higher. And that's really the purpose of what our strategic account planning is meant to do. So 50% said all of the above. And then some said protect and grow key in relationships. Yeah, but the answer is all of the above. Let me just end that. We'll just share the results. Okay. So before we get into the actual nuts and bolts of implementing this, let's talk about what account planning is and isn't. Because very often what we find is that account planning can be quite basic and really not up to purpose when we look at what certain organizations are actually doing. So first of all, what it's not is just adding another number to last year's revenue. It's not superficial and completed once a year. I mean, completed and then we put it in a drawer and we never see it again. It doesn't involve the customer. Again, very often when we've run workshops where we've actually had the customer in the workshop as part of that planning session, it focuses exclusively on what the seller wants. We aren't going to move forward if we just focus it on what we want to sell to the account. We've got to figure out, how do we understand what's going on in their world, and what are they interested in? What are the issues that they're trying to solve? I would say singly, whenever we start with an organization, the research that sits behind the account is often lacking, because what we want is deep research in terms of understanding what's going on in the customer's world. There's little or no planned relationship strategy, and that comes down to perception development as well, right? So how are we consciously and intentionally focusing on key individuals and developing their perception of us, because that affects the way they work with us. And it doesn't create long-term differentiation. Here's what we want it to do, okay? It's based on the deep understanding of the client's world. It becomes that real sort of North Star strategically for relationship development. It's continued to be updated and revised and adapted as circumstances change. Sorry, 2 seconds. It involves the customer in the planning process. Now, some people are more or less comfortable with this. It really depends, but it can be a really rewarding experience from a relationship development point of view if your customers are willing to get involved in the account planning relationship. Now, some people are more or less comfortable with that, but it's all about relationship development and being intentional and having a specific strategy that sits around that. We'll talk about revenue projections shortly, but as we start to think about revenue projections, it's not going to be based on what's going on in our world. It's going to be based on what's going on in their world, the issues that they're trying to solve, all of the things that they're trying to get done. And the process itself, what we want this is for it to be a commercial differentiator for us, or a commercial advantage, because the way we engage with the client will certainly be, or should be, a real strategic differentiator for us. And this is the basis for the way we engage with the client. So as we start to think about implementing the process, we have a 4-step guide for this. Let me just admit somebody in. It's 2 seconds. So step 1 is align, and there's a real change management mindset that needs to be adopted with this. So how do we align around what it is we want to do? What's the case for change? How do we select the tools that we want to use and make sure we get the leadership and the communication right? Then we go into a process that we call, 2 seconds, sorry, train, where we train the specific methodology. But this is not a workshop, right? This is not necessarily just attend a workshop and then it's done, because over time, what we want to happen is we want to retain that knowledge, focus on sort of strategic excellence and operational execution, and then we want to sustain. So we train, retain, sustain. And when we look at the best practices, we want to segment this into steps. If we're even if we are even if we are not implementing a new process, but we are updating our process, we still have to be careful because this can be rejected, not necessarily because it doesn't work, but just purely because it's change. And change will very often get rejected purely because we're trying to shift the way people are actually behaving. So we need to adopt a change management approach in order for it to be successful. Always communicate. And let me just go back on that. As we think about change management, this does not necessarily have to be overly complicated. It just needs to be thought out. Communication is absolutely the key with this. And an effectively communicated case for change needs to be thought out and articulated so that people are aware, why are we actually doing this? The thing that will kill any of these initiatives, if you're thinking of implementing an account planning process into your business, any process, the thing that will kill it will be cultural pushback. The cultural pushback being that culture is determined in terms of the way we think and act. If you're asking us to think and act in a different way, then we're so used to that, then naturally reject that. So, but there are simple ways of managing this. So as we're thinking about how we implement this, there are some considerations around how we do that to make sure that we are successful in the way we implement it. Key to this, though, is the framework that we select. And so the framework is important because it provides us with the structure, the process to create the strategy. And I'm going to take you through this, and we're going to go a little deeper into the way we think about putting account planning together. But ultimately, the way I look at a process is a bridge between two sets of behaviors. We have the current set of behaviors now. You implement the process, it shapes the behaviors we want to happen in the future. And then eventually, once those behaviors just become business as usual, the way we do things, that process disappears. It just becomes the way we do things. So let's talk about the strategic account planning framework itself. There are three core elements to this. And I'm going to show you the actual framework. And this is it. So let me just break it into the three core elements. So we have the position. What is our position? And we'll dig into this more deeper in just a second. What is our position in this current relationship? What is the revenue, both historic and projections? And then what's the strategy for us to be able to move the relationship forward? So let's dig into position and positional analysis. One of the first things that we want to do when it comes to organizing ourselves around the account is do our positional analysis. So first of all, who's who in the zoo? We find that most people have done this reasonably well, getting information about who are the key stakeholders within the account itself. But there are things that we need to know, like what are their perceptions of us? What is their advocacy for us? What coverage do we have? The position, your current position from a strategic point of view is always going to be your starting point. And the more accurate the information we have, the more success we're likely to have. Now, even if we don't have accurate information at the start, that's okay. It's a data point in and of itself. But over time, we want to build out what we understand about the client. And so the positional analysis gives us the structure and the framework to do that. Then we want to focus on how do we understand their world. Primarily, what are the issues, the things that they're prioritizing, the things that are exciting them, keeping them up at night. Fundamentally, what this is all about is how do we identify new opportunities earlier and get out in front of the buying process. Again, I mentioned this earlier, typically the level of research that goes into the positional analysis is not that great for most account planners. And we've even had organizations, and I'm not suggesting people would need to do this themselves, but hire research companies on some of their accounts to do some of this research, because the quality of the research, rubbish in, rubbish out, the quality of the research, what you understand about your account is absolutely critical. And the other aspect of this as well is that you need to have conversations with the stakeholders about what's going on in their world. You need to get and understand their perceptions. The third part of this is revenue. So we're talking about how do we protect and grow our existing revenue streams. So we want to know historic revenue, because we want to understand what are the trends that have happened. Are we trending down? Are we trending up in terms of revenue? What current opportunities are currently in play? And that can include existing revenue as well if we've got recurring revenue streams. And then what are the potential opportunities? And here, this is where we want to get the list of any possible opportunity that we could be pursuing that we surface as a result of the positional analysis. Again, people tend to be a little bit shy here because they think that they're putting forward opportunities that they're committed to. It's not about that. It's about how do we surface the stuff that could possibly turn into the pursuit of an opportunity. And then as we project revenue, this is all going to be about the information that we have, right? So if we're projecting revenue, do we understand what are the current opportunities? What are the potential opportunities? How do they see us? What's their view of us? And success will depend on a number of different factors, but it comes down to how well we execute the strategy and also whether we're prepared to make strategic investments into the account itself. Now, we may already be doing that, and a strategic investment might be an account manager, for instance, or it could be an account manager. But again, that's another consideration as we start to think about how do we move the relationship forward. Are there things that we could be doing? Are there investments that we might need to make into the account to move it forward? Strategy-wise, then the strategy is all about how do we advance the perceptions of those key stakeholders within the account. So we need to understand how they see us. And so we need to get a sort of baseline measurement as far as that's concerned. And you may remember, for those of you that were at the last session, if you weren't, don't worry, this will be a more detailed version of this will be in the white paper we'll send you afterwards. But just looking at what type of relationship do you have with them? How do they see you? And where you are in terms of the customer relationship status scale, if you like, will only be determined by the way they see us. So if they see us as a vendor, then there are certain implications to that. If they see us as a vendor, it's we may be seen as a commodity. There's less engagement, for instance. The influence of competition is significantly more important. As we move up the relationship status, then those sorts of things tend to dissipate a little. Now, there's no right or wrong place to be here. There's just a place you decide that you want to be over time. And obviously, the further you move up the scale, the more investment time is required. So we then need to think of, so what are the things that we need to do, right? What are the activities? What are the investments that we may need to make in order for us to move up the scale? But ultimately, when we do this, this is all about how we create long-term differentiation. And that's key, because very often at the opportunity level, we may not have the opportunity to be seen as differentiated. So through the account plan, this is one of our key objectives. And as I mentioned as well, I probably stated this a few times, the strength of your strategy is determined by how much you know and the accuracy of that information. So 3 parts of the strategy: position, revenue, strategy. These are 3 things that we want to consider. Now, what I want to speak about is the account planning team. So when we speak to a lot of customers tend to set themselves up like this. Now, account planning teams should be cross-functional. There should be multiple touch points. But typically, if it's set up where you have one single point of contact, so you've got the account manager, the account owner just speaking to the account itself, that can present problems. And I've just noticed 2 questions in the chat, so just bear with me a second. I'll just finish this and then look at the questions. So the account owner speaking directly with the account itself, if the account owner has other accounts, then time can be watered down. They could leave with information, they could leave with the account. The way we want to structure the team is where we've got the multiple cross-functional points and the account owner managing those. this is the lowest risk way of doing it, and the way that we can make sure that we get multiple touch points. Because again, if we've got these multiple touch points, what we want is to see if any of these people are able to surface other opportunities, other needs within the account, other issues that the client is trying to solve. Now, you may not have that much choice in terms of how you structure it, but even if you do structure it with just the one-to-one, then at least you know some of the downsides and some of the issues that can cause. Let me just quickly have a look at the question. So Karina's saying, considering the constant change you mentioned and the strategizing and projections, what seems to be the best timeline, years, months to consider from your experience? Karina, just timeline in terms of what? Putting an account plan together, the view?
Exactly, the view, like from your experience, because that's just my impression. Nowadays, almost any sector, if they do strategize and have an account, but their strategy is for 5 years, that seems to me very dangerous, because the data and the information is changing almost from 1 year to another. I mean, during COVID, there was one set, now recession, there's another set. So if you would do such work with people, what is the timeline, the ideal timeline at this point? Like, of course, cross-sector and industries might be slightly different, but yeah.
So still need to clarify the question. So are we saying if we put the account plan together, is the view like 12 months, 24 months, 36 months? Is that what we're saying? Yeah. So it depends on the industry. I mean, if again, if you're working in, say, the aerospace industry, where you're selling, and this is just sort of extreme, when you've got sort of sales cycles that are like 24 months, then that is going to mean that you're going to have an account planning cycle that's going to be much longer. But normally we set the account plan for 12 months, and we'll talk about cadence in just a moment, but then we want to review it regularly. That's the key thing. The cardinal sin is to kind of do it and then put it in the drawer and then never talk about it again until the end of the year, and we go, oh, what's it? Blow the dust off it and say, oh, what's this? It needs to be a living, breathing thing. And as circumstances evolve, what we want is to be able to go back to it, make a change, cycle through it again. What's changing the client's business? How does that affect what we're trying to do, our revenue? How does that change the strategy? I mean, and it can just come down to be as simple as people, key people in the account leaving the business, and then you've got to keep, then rebuild relationships. Short answer, typically it's 12 months, but it could be longer depending on sales cycles.
Thank you.
Yes, okay. And then Wilfred says, Mark, does this structure help you calculate the return on investment you're making? Yes, it does. Absolutely. And we talked about, and Wilfred, I'm not sure if you're in the first session, but we can send it to you. We talk about return on relationship investment specifically and how to calculate that. And we've got a system for that.
I've got a question, Mark.
Yeah.
See, so when you look at this diagram, I really like the way you've laid it out, where you put the team in the middle here, right, between the account and then the account owners managing the team, the sales, operations, finance, and HR. Yeah. How do you effectively get them to engage with the account owner consistently? So if they're in different countries and different roles, and how do you manage that?
So again, it's going to come down to the cadence that you have with reviewing the account. So in an ideal world, notwithstanding everybody's busy schedules, what we would want is a situation where once a quarter, everybody comes together to review the Apple account, right? So we get all of the touch points, sales, operations, finance, HR, and they come together and we have this, we have a review of where we are, what we know, what are the challenges, what are the issues, what's changed. So it comes down to cadence and the regular nature, but also it also comes back to, sort of, if you're implementing this and you don't have this already in place, then what you're going to do is you're going to be creating change within the business. That then comes back to how do we manage that change? Because some people, for instance, in HR, who've never felt that the need to be involved in the account plan, all of a sudden that becomes an additional part of their job. And so we need to then we need to be able to articulate, why are we changing what it is that we're doing? What is your specific role when it comes to being involved within an account? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's perfect, actually. Yeah. So it comes back to that, getting the teams together, yeah, right, and having those proper structured meetings with the teams as a group. Yeah, I hadn't quite thought of about that. I like that. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So the account owners managing those relationships and managing those meetings. Yeah, so and building the agendas for them.
Correct. And the central point of us going back, in fact, we'll just move on to cadence, just sort of half an eye on the time as well, because I just want to allow some time for questions. So I'm going to be reiterating some of the stuff that I've just said, right? But the strategic account plan is the North Star, right? So we come back to that framework that we talked about earlier on, and that is a dynamic tool that we use. We update it, we put the updated information through that system, and we see what comes out the other end in terms of the key actions that we need to take. So constantly updating, constantly taking into the fact that things evolve, things change within the client's business, and it changes increasingly faster. Reviewing it, making sure that we don't hide it or just forget about it and we keep going back to it. That is the key to all of this, to be honest, right? The framework is what it is, right? It's, again, working with an organization over the last couple of years, and I mentioned this as an example last time, they just tripled their revenue from 2 of their key clients, and they only have 6 key clients. It's an organization in China, German organization. And the key to what they did was that they were so disciplined around the cadence. They kept coming back together as a team and making sure that they were all aligned. And sometimes they slipped up, but hey, they knew when they were not aligned, and when they slipped up, they knew far quicker and they knew how to correct it. So the other thing, of course, as well, is that lots of organizations think that we need to develop this thinking in isolation of the client. The framework that we help implement has key parts of this that we need to share with the client. For instance, creating the desired relationship state, right? And being able to articulate that and get them to agree it. Because if you can get them to agree the way they want the relationship to evolve in as much as we do, and that has to be win-win, then we have kind of like the relationship statement, the mission statement, if you like, for the relationship. And that also then becomes a North Star for the relationship, as well as the strategy. I'm going to go as far as to say this, right? That the actual strategic plan itself can only be validated if the client side has actually signed off on it. Now, I don't mean you actually put in front of them the actual framework itself, but you want the client to agree to certain things. And if they don't do this, that's a data point in and of itself. Okay, Niti, the reviews could be done by the account owner. Niti, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to that question in a moment. Let me just push through, because I just want to make sure we've got time for questions, but I'm going to come back to that in just a second, because I just want to get a better understanding of what it is you're trying to do. And Raman, I just see that comment as well. So, okay, turning strategy into action. So here's the thing, right? You can do all the strategic thinking that you want, but if it doesn't manifest into quality action that's well executed, then it's all for nothing. So everything that we do is in this strategic account planning process is all done with action in mind, but not action for the sake of action. So, we can have all this great thinking, but execution is key. We want to shift from the discussion and make sure that activation, the connection between the two, is not weak or non-existent. And remember, it's a team game. So we want that cross-functional collaboration, which can, in some organizations, can be really challenging, particularly if they're used to working in silos. We also want leadership involved to ensure that they are there to sort out any issues. Now, I'd love to take credit for this particular idea, but I can't. But there is this concept of having a strategic unblocker. And what this means is that if you are able to do this, you set up a senior person in your organization who has a connection to a senior person in the client's organization. And when anytime you get difficulties in trying to get things through, as you inevitably will, then you have this ability to have this overarching conversation. And I've seen accounts where we've had this in place, and I'm currently working with a client in Malaysia where we don't have this in place. And it's a real struggle because the hierarchical nature of the organization prevents us from being able to have those really strategic conversations that need to take place, because we need to redirect or course correct where the project's actually heading. So this concept of having a strategic unblocker, I think, is super, super important. So just some final thoughts, and then I want to open it up for some questions. Here's the thing, right? So customers' expectations are changing. 67% are saying they are holding companies to a much higher standard, and 51% believe that most companies fall below those standards. So they expect great products, great service, but they also expect their business outcomes to be achieved. But what they're also asking for is for us to innovate. And what I mean is that this is not necessarily about, you know, building new apps and new tools, although it might be that. But what I'm talking about innovative thinking, I'm talking about how do we anticipate problems and opportunities that they're facing, right? How do we devise new approaches and or solutions? And what this does is it really underscores the need for that positional analysis and the depth of information that we have about the client. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that right from the get-go you have all of this information straight away. That's not what we're suggesting here. This is a work in progress, right? Progress over perfection. But we need to know what information do we need to get and build up over time, because the key thing for us, and if you think about this from a perception management point of view, how do we stay ahead and anticipate their needs? It's so powerful if we're able to do that. One of the things that the research that we've seen emphasizes is that what buyers specifically want from account people or sellers is the benefit of their experience and understanding their products and services and the benefits of what they do with other clients as well, right? And that's perspective and insights. And that becomes a key differentiator in terms of the way we engage with the client. This, you know, if we're able to anticipate what's going on in the client's world, it's going to help us surface opportunities earlier. And I'm just going to leave you on this particular last point, and then we'll open it up to some questions, right? Anticipatory thinking, if I can say it, it has a huge impact on how they perceive you. And how they perceive you determines how they behave towards you. And that can be the difference between winning and losing specific opportunities. Okay, so there we are. Let's see if there are questions, and I want to open this up for questions now. So there's a few in the chat. So let me just, Fraser, do you want to manage some of these questions, or shall I do that?
I think you could do it, Mark. I think we've got 10 minutes left, so it's pretty short. So does anybody have any questions that they want to bring out, you know, out loud? Open your mic. So
let me just go to Niti. Niti, you said the reviews could be done by the account owner. Could you just clarify what you mean about that, Niti? Just come off mute if you don't mind. Hi, Niti.
Hello, Mark, and hello, everyone on the call. It's great listening to this session. Though I joined late, apologies for that, but still very insightful. So what I mean when I say that the reviews could be done by account owner is it's on one level, it's very important to have the account relationship at all levels and not just the person who's interfacing with the account. On the other hand, at the micro level, so on a day-to-day basis, let's say if there is some critical execution which has a timeline to it, then it becomes important for that one single person who's been interacting with the account to daily review what's happening. And for that, the delivery team, which is being assigned to that account and is working on multiple aspects. So that team could give an update to the account owner. So I think a balance of having a single window along with accountability spread across the delivery team and relationship being managed at different levels. I think all three are, in my view, very important.
Yes.
So just sharing a thought which came to my mind when you were talking about the team structure.
Yes, absolutely. Totally agree. Totally agree. Totally agree. Thank you. Thank you. Let me just move on to the next question. So Raman says this will also help understand the client's key drivers. Raman, just elaborate a little bit on that, if that's okay.
Okay, what I said was when we involve the client in terms of our account plan strategies, this will also help us understand what the client has in mind for the year as part of their project or part of their deliverables. What are the key drivers that they are planning to undertake for the year? So that will help us to plan, coordinate with the client, make sure that we understand the client deliverable more. That gives a better perception to the client that we are more interested in terms of in their strategies, right? So
that's right. And it's thinking about, what are they thinking about? Because what are they thinking about? They're thinking about their profitability. They're thinking about their differentiators, their competition, their strategic initiatives, and so on and so forth. There's a whole range of things, right? But yeah, I mean, again, just breaking it down and figuring out what do we understand, because every single business, all of us are going to be influenced by what's going on at the macro level, what's going on at the industry level, and then what's going on at the organizational level as well. So these three layers of understanding that they're going to be thinking about, because, and we know that they're thinking about it. Why? Because we think about the same stuff as well within our organizations.
Absolutely. If you look at the global organizations today, most of the global organizations, one of the initiatives which most of the companies have taken was sustainability is one of their global sustainable initiatives. So if we understand what's the timeline, what's the agenda for the client, and if you're able to work along with them, and that benefits us as well the client. I think that makes a job much easier for us, both from driving the organizational interest and also the opportunities what we have in front of us.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
So Mark, can I interrupt you? So you've got 5 minutes left. I think Wilfred's got a good question there in the chat. Yeah. Can you give an example of how this has worked? Go ahead.
Give you 2 examples. I'll give you an example. And these are current right now of where not having a strategic unblocker causes an issue, right? So in this particular, I can't say the name of the organization for commercial sensitivities, but so the problem is that the project is now stuck at the working level, right? The working group level, and the project requires leadership involvement, but because of the hierarchical nature within the organization, the working group will not let the consulting team that I'm working for, we will not let us through to that leadership level, because at the start, what was happened, I came into this late, there was no relationship built across between somebody senior within the consulting company in this particular case and somebody senior within the client organization. And as a consequence, the leadership is not getting involved, and as a consequence, the project is not is potentially flagging because the leadership needs to be involved. I'm trying to talk about this, but I can't really talk about the specifics because it's a really sensitive organization. But that's where it doesn't work. In another scenario, where again we had a situation where we were trying to get a particular initiative to take place, but there were just it just got stymied. And it just got stuck in a whole bunch of bureaucracy of decision making, and there was a level of urgency that was required for this particular initiative to take place. There was that relationship that had already been formed, and as a consequence, the 2 senior people were able to have the conversation, and as a consequence, they managed to get through the bureaucracy of the decision-making process, which was all budgetary, to be honest, right? They managed to sort of express that, and therefore it didn't put the project in jeopardy, or that particular initiative in jeopardy. And so it was expressed and it went through, because there was the ability to be able to pick up the phone and say, Mohammed, I'll just use you as an example. I'm just using your name, Mohammed. There's something that we need to move pretty quickly, and these are the reasons, etc., etc. As a consequence, it moved quickly. So, Wilfred, does that help? Okay, good.
I have a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Of course.
I am thinking now from the perspective of the consultant or even internal person in charge of implementing this. How do you introduce the concept of the strategic unblocker early on, and the stakeholders not thinking that you are trying to just find someone once there is a bump in the road that you dump it into that person. Because I can just imagine that they're like, you are in charge, so why do you need us to identify someone who will take care if something is blocking? I see the value for it, but I don't know how the stakeholders will respond to that idea if you set it up.
Well, you're right. Anytime you try and circumvent or go across the top of people, right, it's always going to upset them. So you have to do it right from the very start. And if you don't, if you don't implement it from the start, it's really difficult to implement it without upsetting people later on. Now, that's a strategic decision to make. If you feel that implementing it is more important than the sensitivities of some of the working group, then you may decide to do that anyway, right? I mean, you can supersede, go over the top anytime, but that is a strategic decision that should be made with known consequences. But essentially, when you set it up at the start, and you know, any project or initiative, and Corinne, I'm sure you know this, right? You know, it has to be leader-led.
Yeah.
So as part of sort of good, if we can just call it project management, account management, we want to make sure that we get that set up right from the start.
And they adhere easily from your experience to that strategic unblocker? They adhere to that?
Well, it depends from organization to organization. If we get the point that what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make sure that we're not trying to sort of jeopardize people or put them in trouble, right? That we're actually in the event of a specific situation, we may need to have two senior people talking. Then if it's common sense, right, then hopefully, but different people will react to this very differently. I mean, it really depends. It can come down to personality sometimes and the way teams are structured and culture and hierarchy and all of that sort of stuff. So it may not necessarily be a perfect solution, but like you say, it has high value.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So shall I wrap up, Mark?
Sure. Look, we're right on time.
Dead on time. Yeah, it's a brilliant session, right? Really amazing. I didn't have any doubt it was going to be like that, right? You know, and I think all of us found it really interesting. You know, I walked away with you answered questions that I just hadn't thought about it from that perspective. So thank you very much, Mark. And there's going to be a third session, so everybody's welcome to come to that. We'll let you know the third session, which is how do you practically, I think Mark's going to build a sort of model that sits around, or present a model that sits around, how do you physically do account management? So that next session is going to cover that and really, and how to actually have meetings. Yeah. So, and we've got the video recorded. We're going to share it with you. Mark's got an article and all of this that he's going to share. And yeah, thank you very much, Mark. It's really brilliant. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome. You're welcome, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was of value.